He lived the kind of story most people can only dream about. Al Pacino didn't just act. He ignited the screen. His presence filled the room before a single word left his mouth. Every glance felt like a secret, every silence like a storm waiting to break. From The Godfather to Scent of a Woman, he didn't simply build a career, he built a monument, one brick at a time, shaped by hunger, brilliance, and the wounds of his past. And then there was Diane Keaton. She carried the sunshine of California on the outside, but possessed a quiet, unshakable strength within. From Annie Hall to Reds, she turned awkwardness into something powerful and made sincerity more dazzling than spectacle. She wasn't chasing fame, she was redefining it, showing the world that honesty could be louder than glamour. When their paths crossed, it wasn't a simple love story. It was two different storms choosing to share the same sky. He was raw voltage, she was warmth. For nearly 20 years, their connection existed in that rare space between truth and legend. Today, we're going to revisit their journey, how it began, why it unraveled, and why, in many ways, it never truly ended. Alfredo James Pacino was born on April 25, 1940, to a Sicilian family whose dreams far outstripped their means. When his father walked away, a space opened up that applause would never quite fill. His mother, Rose, brought him to the South Bronx, where winters crept through cracked windows and unpaid rent notices felt like permanent house guests. The local movie theater became his sanctuary. Under the flickering light of old film reels, the shadows on the screen were gentler than the ones waiting at home. By the time he was 10, he'd already met pain, the kind that leaves both scars and memory. At 13, he was known as Sonny, restless, charming, already flirting with escapes that took more than they gave. By 17, he had left school behind, picking up odd jobs as nights grew longer and colder. 3 of the boys he grew up with didn't make it to 20. He survived because he found acting at HB Studio, the Actors Studio, Lee Strasberg. In those rooms, Pacino learned how to mold chaos into craft and how to turn loneliness into a tool. At 22, he was still shivering in cheap apartments, sneaking into empty theaters to nap. But the work, it was like breathing. 68 brought him The Indian Wants the Bronx and an Obie Award. A year later came Does a Tiger Wear a Necktie? And with it, a Tony. These weren't signs of comfort. They were proof that the boy who once felt invisible had finally been seen. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, Diane Keaton was carving her own path. Born January 5, 1946 in Los Angeles, she grew up in a house where emotions were felt but rarely voiced. Her father, Jack Hall, was a quiet, steady presence. Her mother, Dorothy Deanne Keaton Hall, once crowned Mrs. Los Angeles, 1955, had a spark that life didn't allow to fully burn. Diane watched this closely, learning that silence could be both a shield and a prison. She vowed not to disappear. She dropped Hall from her name and took her mother's maiden name, Keaton, as a tribute. Then she packed a suitcase, grabbed 2 scripts, and took a leap of faith, heading for New York City. Her apartment was tiny. The radiator rattled more than it heated. Auditions were brutal. She waited tables by day, sang in smoky clubs by night, and kept showing up. In 1968, Hair on Broadway became her big break. She didn't fit Hollywood's mold, and that was exactly what made her shine. The stage didn't just give her work, it gave her a voice. Then came the moment that would change both their lives. A dusty soundstage, light cutting through the air. 2 young actors, Al Pacino, intense and still, Diane Keaton, luminous and disarming, stood side by side. They were filming a little mob film that no one knew would become The Godfather. He played Michael Corleone. She was Kay Adams. They began as scene partners but became something far deeper, companions in quiet. She teased him out of his shell. He let her into his silence, a space not many were allowed to enter. Their chemistry wasn't manufactured. It poured off the screen naturally. Crew members didn't whisper about retakes. They whispered about electricity. The studio didn't even want Pacino at first. Too small, too unknown. But Francis Ford Coppola fought for him. To prove his point, they filmed the legendary restaurant scene, the one with the gun in the bathroom, early on. Under the low hum of fluorescent lights, Pacino embodied a man swallowing a storm. When the gunshots rang out, the arguments ended. Hollywood had witnessed something undeniable. He limped away from that set with a knee injury but kept working. That performance transformed his career, but it didn't necessarily bring joy. When awards season listed him as supporting, he refused to attend. Sometimes success feels cold when it's labeled wrong. And amid that whirlwind, his connection with Keaton deepened. She was ease where he was intensity. Away from the camera, he laughed, a rare, genuine sound. With her, it felt safe. 73 brought Serpico. Pacino threw himself into the role so fully that it left lasting marks on him. A decade later came Scarface, 1983, a role so explosive it unsettled even him. A prop explosion burned his hand, and critics tore into the film. But time would flip the verdict. Scarface became immortal. Then came 1992's Scent of a Woman. Pacino learned to navigate the world as a blind man, by sound, by instinct, by feel. He finally held the Oscar that had eluded him for decades. His face that night said it all. Proud, but exhausted. Carrying other people's pain so convincingly takes something from you. Through it all, he never abandoned the craft. Looking for Richard, 1996, Chinese Coffee, 2000, his work at the Actors Studio, Pacino remained the hungry kid from the Bronx, now giving others the tools that had saved him. Diane Keaton's path soared too. The Godfather, 1972, gave her credibility. Annie Hall, 1977, made her an icon. Her Oscar-winning performance turned imperfection into poetry. But success has its price. Sleep grew scarce. Pressure grew loud. By the time she filmed Reds, 1981, she poured everything she had into the role. When the wave of fame cooled in the 1980s, she didn't collapse. She wrote, she directed, and followed projects that prioritized truth over trend. Between 1972 and 1981, their love wasn't tabloid fodder. It was real. He called her light. She called him one of a kind. They weren't performing for the cameras. They were sharing burnt pasta, arguing over films, scribbling love notes into scripts, building something quietly real. But fame stretches time thin. Shoots in different countries, missed phone calls, letters unanswered. She wanted marriage. He wasn't ready for permanence. Not yet. The end came not with screaming, but with soft goodbyes, a quiet suitcase. A door closing gently, rain blurring the sidewalk outside. Years later, he'd say, "I wasn't ready for her love." She'd respond, "He broke my heart, but he didn't mean to." There were no villains here, just two souls at different places on the same road, and still they never fully let go. In 1990, on the set of The Godfather Part 3, the old rhythm returned, the glances, the pauses, the ache. Real life doesn't always allow for retakes. Ask him if he regrets not marrying her, and you'll hear it, not just in his words, but in the silence that comes first. Every day, ask her, and you'll see it in her smile before she even answers. Because what they had was real, not perfect, not scripted, real. Two people shaped by very different childhoods, his forged in the fires of the Bronx, hers in a home that swallowed emotion, and they found each other in a space where both could finally breathe. He turned hunger into magnetic stillness. She turned shyness into fearless honesty. Together, they reminded the world that even in the noise of ambition, gentleness can win. And so, their story leads us to October 11th, 2025. After years of facing illness with the same humor and grace that defined her, Diane Keaton quietly passed away at 79. The tributes came like a tide. Broadway dimmed its lights. Fans left hats and flowers at old theaters. Clips of Annie Hall, The Godfather, Reds flooded every screen. The line repeated everywhere was simple. She never pretended to be perfect, and that's what made her unforgettable. Somewhere in New York, Al Pacino, now 85, stood by a window and whispered the only words he could find. She was my friend, my light, and a part of me that time could never take. I will love her always. It wasn't closure, it was truth. Because their story was never about guarantees, it was about reverence. Two lives that crossed, shaped each other, cracked a little, and kept going, forever changed. Greatness is endurance. Pacino didn't arrive. He survived the cold, the hunger, the doubt. Gentleness is strength. Keaton made awkwardness radiant and turned sincerity into a legacy. Love doesn't need to be permanent to be sacred. Some great loves end not with rings, but with gratitude, and live on as memory. And when applause fades, it's the work that remains. If their story touched you, if you've ever loved someone you could never forget, leave a light for Diane Keaton and a nod for Al Pacino, the boy who survived the Bronx and the woman who taught the world that awkwardness can shine. The story isn't over. It simply changed shape, living on in their films, their words, their laughter, and in the echo they left behind for all of us.